With how complex and packed the story of FNAF is, there's a million things to make a theory on, but sometimes one topic needs to be talked about again and again because of how important and debated said topic is. There's a few things like that, and a few things I've made multiple videos about over time, such as FNAF 4's protagonist and gameplay, and the topic for today's video, the time placement of sister location. The first time I made a video on this was back in November of 2020, and the previous time was April of 2022, but even the more recent one is a bit under par compared to my videos of nowadays. And so I considered remaking that video for a little while, but the evidence hadn't really changed, and the main point of the theory was a topic that I've talked about in a few other videos ever since then. But over the past few months, we've gotten two pretty major pieces of evidence for the theory, and so I saw it as a perfect opportunity to talk about this theory once more. In this video, we will be talking about why sister location takes place after FNAF 1, using old and new evidence and explaining away evidence for the contrary. But without any further ado, let's get started. There's a few reasons that a lot of people don't believe sister location is after FNAF 1, so I think unlike many of my other theories, it's probably better to explain away supposedly contradictory evidence so that you can best understand all the reasons that sister location is after FNAF 1. Probably the most common piece of evidence that people use to say sister location is before FNAF 1 and possibly FNAF 2 is the fact that Michael is described as having odor in FNAFs 1 and 2, which he definitely would if he was a rotting corpse as a result of sister location. But there's a few problems with this. The biggest problem in my opinion with the odor argument is that there are numerous other explanations for the odor. Something a lot of people don't consider is the fact that Michael only gets fired for odor on night 7, the hardest night of all, meaning he can easily have just been stressed out and sweating. And if he was actually a purple corpse, how would he have been hired in the first place? If you are to say that he was just hired because of an interview over the phone, that still doesn't work because how would he have been fired for odor if nobody ever saw him? And if people did see him, then the odor would not be the reason he is fired. The reason he would be fired is because he's a purple corpse. But there's other explanations for the odor too, such as him simply having poor hygiene, though that one isn't as likely. Another explanation that is perfectly plausible also comes from the pink slip in FNAF 1. Notice how Mike gets fired for both odor and tampering with the animatronics. Him tampering with the animatronics could very well be the actual reason that he has odor, because the animatronics have bodies inside them and he was touching them. The one thing is though, that by the time of FNAF 1, the animatronics actually don't have bodies in them anymore. We see this in FNAF VR's parts and service, and we can clearly see holes in the wizards that would definitely reveal the dead bodies, not to mention body parts not falling out when Afton destroys the animatronics. Obviously that wouldn't be animated or put into the games, but still it should be there if the bodies are supposed to be in the animatronics. It's likely that Fazbear Entertainment found the bodies and disposed of them without letting the public or the police know. However, despite this, Mike getting the odor from the animatronics is entirely likely regardless, considering they haven't been cleaned, meaning they're dirty and smell bad regardless. Tape Girl in FNAF VR also explains why Mike gets fired in general, as they find out that he knows something and try to silence him by firing him for little things, such as his odor. And that's not even addressing the fact that Mike had odor all the way back in FNAF 1 and 2 when sister location wasn't planned. Could Scott have simply used the odor as a plot point for sister location? Yeah, but the problem is the double standard here. If the odor from before sister location was planned can be used as evidence to say that sister location is before FNAF 1, then we can also use the fact that Mike has his normal blue, non-purple, and non-decayed eyes in FNAF 1 as we see on the game over screen where his eyes pop out of the front of the mask. I'm not saying that's good evidence. What I'm saying is that if one thing can be used as evidence, the other thing can too, and they contradict each other. However, there's also the whole idea that Remnant can regenerate you, which I personally believe, which would explain Mike having normal eyes, but at the same time, if Mike regenerated, then he wouldn't be a corpse anymore, and therefore he wouldn't have odor in the first place. No matter what way you look at it, the odor is not viable evidence that sister location is before FNAF 1. Another issue some people have with sister location being after FNAF 1 is Mike's motivations. It's implied since Mike follows William's instructions and seems to trust him that Mike doesn't know until sister location that Afton killed the kids, but I don't think people realize that that doesn't really change anything. If you think about it, there's no real reason Mike has to have known William was the killer during FNAFs 1 and 2. Instead, he could have gone to those locations under William's instructions as well, as after he killed the Save Them kids, he was no longer allowed into Freddy's. Phone Guy tells us as much when he talks about how there's an investigation going on at Freddy's, and the building goes on lockdown. Previous employees no longer allowed inside, and after that, Mike is the one who gets the job there. Mike likely works there under William's instructions because he can't work there anymore, so that doesn't really cause any problems with Sister Location's time placement. And the last main piece of evidence people use to say Sister Location is before FNAF 1 is the survival logbook. The logbook is given to security guards for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza to train them for the job, and because of that, many people seem to believe that the logbook was given to Mike during the events of FNAF 1, and considering there's Sister Location references in the book, Sister Location must have already happened by the time of FNAF 1. However, there's a few issues with this. The survival logbook, under any circumstances, must have been during FNAF 1 or later, and Mike draws Nightmare Fredbear in the logbook under recent dreams, meaning he has had the FNAF 4 nightmares recently by the time he gets the logbook. However, in FNAF 4 itself, he hears the FNAF 1 phone call, meaning FNAF 4 is after FNAF 1. Some may argue that Mike is having nightmares between his FNAF 1 shifts, but whether it's a nightmare or not, there's no reason the game would be lying to us about what time it is. So FNAF 1 is before FNAF 4, and FNAF 4 is before the logbook, which means that the logbook is not during FNAF 1, it's after FNAF 1. The FNAF 3 office also appears in the book, which basically tells us that the logbook wasn't an authentic Freddy Fazbear's Pizza security logbook, but rather a prop used for the horror attraction security guard, which entirely makes sense in the context of FNAF 3. So now we're finally done going over the points people use to prove Sister Location is before FNAF 1, and now we can actually start talking about the evidence that it's after FNAF 1, and the biggest reason is a topic I've talked about many times before, Molten MCI. To those uninformed, Molten MCI is the theory, though at this point it's more than just a theory, that the missing children are the remnant that is present inside Molten Freddy, as shown in the blueprints from FNAF 6, and by extension, the Funtime animatronics. This is something that was initially implied in FNAF 6, but that most people didn't really pick up on until the fourth closet. In the fourth closet, it's revealed that after the events of the Twisted Ones, William created Circus Baby's Pizza World. He destroys the original 5 animatronics from Freddy's and melts their endoskeletons together, melding the spirits together and infusing this molten metal into Funtime Freddy and Foxy as well as himself to try and fix his body. Multiple spirits are in multiple bodies, meaning all the missing kids were inside Funtime Freddy, Foxy, and Afton at the same time. Pieces of each of the spirits were split up between multiple bodies, which causes them to sort of forget stuff because the fragments of their memories were separated, and Carlton helps them put them back together and helps the kids remember. But the gist is, the original 5 animatronics endoskeletons are melted together and infused into the Funtimes. But does anything actually imply this to be the case in the games? Absolutely. We know Molten Freddy has Remnant in him from the FNAF 6 blueprints, and we also know that Molten Freddy is made up of the Funtime animatronics. Henry also directly tells us that the missing kids are present in FNAF 6, and if they're the Remnant in the Funtimes in the books, and the Funtimes are present in FNAF 6 in an animatronic that has Remnant, logic tells us that the missing kids are the Funtimes in the games as well. But don't worry, I'm not just going to skip over the explanation of how Henry tells us the missing kids are in FNAF 6, because his goal in the game is to set all the spirits free, such as the puppet, who he tells in his final speech that it's time for her to rest and for those she has carried in her arms, i.e. the missing kids. In the Happiest Day minigame from FNAF 3, we see all the missing kids get set free, but the puppet actually gets set free along with them. That means that if the puppet isn't freed yet by FNAF 6, the missing kids aren't either. In order for them to be freed, they must also be present in FNAF 6 due to the fact that Henry is trying to free everyone, including the missing kids, and the fact that the fourth closet was one of the major releases after FNAF 6 implies that it was trying to clarify what FNAF 6 was trying to show us that we didn't understand at the time. In the FNAF 6 Insanity ending, Henry also describes the Follow Me minigames from FNAF 3 and heavily implies that the missing kids ended up in the Funtimes as a result of that. For this part, I'll play a clip from a previous video where I discussed this whole topic.
Small souls trapped in prisons of my making, now set to new purpose, and used in ways I never thought imaginable.
This is talking about how the original animatronics were made by Henry and William perverted his technology and used it to create the Funtimes, which he makes to kill, and Henry talking about the missing kids shows that they are the souls he's saying are in the Funtimes.
He lured them all back to a familiar place, back with familiar tricks. He brought them all together.
This is him clearly talking about Follow Me. Luring them back to a familiar place is talking about the safe room, which is where the kids were lured to in the Missing Children incident as we know from FNAF 3. The familiar tricks he's talking about are the facts that he lures them like he did in the Missing Children incident, and he is using Shadow Freddy to do so, and Shadow Freddy is a being representing all of William's malicious intent. Saying he brought them all together is referring to William melting the endoskeletons together and tying the spirits together, which is exactly how Molten MCI works.
Are they still aware? I hope not. It keeps me awake at night. I could make myself sleep, but not yet. Not until I undo what he has done and heal this wound. A wound first inflicted on me, but then one that I let bleed out to cause all of this.
The question of whether or not the kids are still aware is referring to the fourth closet, where the spirits, while still aware, lose some aspects of their memories because the fragments of their spirits are separated from each other, distributed among multiple bodies. Him saying that he has to heal this wound means the missing children have to be here, otherwise he's not healing the wound at all.
He set some kind of trap. I don't know what it was, but he led them there, again. He overpowered them, again. And he robbed them of the only thing that they had, again.
This is also blatantly describing Follow Me, and the fact that he says that William robbed the spirits of the only thing that they had confirms that after Follow Me they aren't freed. So where are they? Everything else tells us that they are in the fun times.
I don't know how those tiny breaths of life came to inhabit those machines, but they will never find rest now, not like this. I have to call them all back, all of them, together in one place.
This entire insanity-ending monologue is talking about the missing children, meaning that when he says he has to call them all back to one place, that would include the missing kids too. He's saying that those kids won't find rest unless he enacts his plan, meaning that, as I've been saying, they are here. And there's nowhere else they can be. Some argue that they're in the Rockstar animatronics, but that can't be true because the Rockstars are an optional buy. You can beat the game without buying the Rockstars, so they aren't part of Henry's plan. He claims the missing kids to be here whether you buy the Rockstars or not. I also don't think the fast fact claiming the original Bonnie was used in the production of Rockstar Bonnie means anything. Using them in the production likely just means they used the original Bonnie as a reference. Even if Fazbear Entertainment did use parts from the original Bonnie, we see the remains of Bonnie in FNAF 3, and it doesn't exactly look like he's still possessed. And of course, that's because the spirits of the original kids are in the fun times. So those are all the reasons Molten MCI must be true. To put it simply, the endoskeletons of the FNAF 1 animatronics were taken down by Afton into Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental when William destroyed them all in the Follow Me FNAF 3 minigames. Notice how there's no endo parts on the ground when William destroyed them? It's not like showing the endo parts would be too difficult. We literally see endo parts in these very minigames anyway, so the lack of them here definitely feels intentional. Though to be fair, this was before Sister Location was planned, but I don't think the endos not being on the ground was unintentional, even if it didn't mean the same thing then that it does now. But those endos are a really important factor here. The FNAF 1 animatronics have Endo 01 endoskeletons, which would look like this, but someone recently discovered that Endo 01s appeared in Ennard's vent repair from Sister Location. At the end of the level, inside the furnace that Ennard burns in, there is a clump of Endo 01s. Someone separated the models and discovered that there were 4 different endoskeletons. The fact that Endo 01s are in a furnace in Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, where the fun times are, clearly screams in our faces that Molten MCI is true, especially since they're in a furnace just like the furnace William uses to melt the animatronics in the fourth closet just as he would have in the games. Since these endoskeletons from the FNAF 1 animatronics are here and not in the animatronics anymore, this must be after FNAF 1 and also after the Follow Me minigames. But there's just one strange thing about this. The Remnant in the Fun Times should have 5 spirits. It's always been 5. In the fourth closet, Golden Freddy is a part of the Fun Times, and his endoskeleton is melted with the others. But in the furnace, there's only 4 endoskeletons, not 5. In Follow Me, we never see Golden Freddy get destroyed. It would be entirely possible Afton just destroyed Golden Freddy separately, but Golden Freddy just isn't present with the other endos in the furnace, which seems to imply that he was simply excluded, and he wasn't part of the Fun Times. Something else about Molten MCI that I chose not to talk about earlier is the Candy Cadet stories. In each of the Candy Cadet stories, 5 things become 1 thing. I feel like I should explain that a little bit because there's a big misconception about these. There's one story where a snake eats a cat and 5 nights later the owner of the cat and the snake feels guilty and gets the pieces of the cat out of the snake. But there's a misconception that in this story only 1 cat dies. This is simply not true. The rationale here is that it said that the boy stitches the pieces of the cat back together, cat singular, and it doesn't say 4 more cats die, it just says 5 nights later he feels guilty. But this argument just doesn't make sense, because it's specifically 5 nights that go by before he's very guilty. Why would it say he felt guilty 5 nights later? Oh, you know, because he has 5 cats. It's very easy to recognize that once a night, the snake ate a cat, and after 5 nights, all the cats were eaten, and that's why the boy is guilty 5 nights later. It likely claims the cat to be singular rather than plural because the point of the story is combining all the cats into one singular body, and the other 2 stories are just the same with the woman melting the keys together and the man tying the orphans together, 5 things becoming 1. Each of these stories also ties in with one of the elements of Molten MCI. The cat one ties into the the fact that it's the animatronics that are put together, and the animatronics are all animal mascots, hence the cats. The story about the keys has the woman melt the keys together, which ties into the endoskeletons being melted together, and the orphan stories should be self-explanatory. The Candy Cadet stories are all about Molten MCI. And while I don't think it's the best evidence, it is definitely notable that the Ultimate Guide directs us to the fourth closet in order to solve the Candy Cadet stories. But that's just it. It doesn't make sense. There's only 4 endoskeletons in the furnace, and there's only 4 animatronics destroyed in Follow Me. Golden Freddy seems to not be a part of the fun times, so why is Candy Cadet implying that he is? The only thing I can think of is that Golden Freddy was supposed to be part of it, but was left out. One common criticism of Afton collecting the endoskeletons during Follow Me is the timing. It would be a bit weird if he got all the endos in one night and then there was a gap, after which he returned to the location. The issue is just consistency in the minigames, but I propose something else. Instead, the gaps between the minigames are consistent, each one happening a day apart. Admittedly, it's weird that it would be raining 5 days in a row, but it is possible, and I feel like this idea doesn't cause that many problems. It's the ideas that sprout out of this one that do, but we'll get to that in a bit. See, the FNAF animatronics are really big. The endoskeletons holding them up are giant metal skeletons that would definitely be a bit heavy. Never did it really make that much sense that Afton would bring all 5 endoskeletons down to sister location in one go. Instead, it would make sense if every time he destroyed an animatronic, he brought the endoskeleton down into sister location, put it in the furnace, and returned the next day. This would explain why he's back on night 5 outside of just retrieving Spring Bonnie and sealing the safe room. Sure, that's completely logical, but what makes more sense would be if the reason he came back on night 5 was to get Golden Freddy. Since Golden Freddy is a bit different to the other animatronics, the spirit is likely able to wander more, the Golden Freddy that attacks us at the game simply being a projection from the spirit in the actual physical suit. Golden Freddy is a physical animatronic, but since he can't move, he attacks us through projections. If the spirit can project itself as the animatronic, surely it can project itself as the ghost. The other ghosts only stand at the doorway of the safe room while the Golden Freddy spirit is much more active. I don't think those at the door are the actual full spirits, but rather just the energy of them remaining in the broken shells of the animatronics. William gets spring-locked before he is able to return, before he is able to get Golden Freddy and bring him back to the furnace. This idea explains why he's not in the furnace and why we don't see Golden Freddy in Follow Me. It accounts for the issue of timing that a lot of people have, and it just makes a lot of sense. However, from this idea, there's 3 branch ideas to consider because we still have to figure out how the remnant got into the fun times. The first idea is that Michael is the one who did it. It's something I talked about in a video in the past that I'll probably put in the end screen for this video, so you can check that out if you want more information. The basic idea is that before William died, he instructed Mike to go down into sister location and put the remnant into the fun times, and one reason for this was that Mike claims he put Baby back together when she became entered, despite the fact that he didn't really do anything, so it could mean that he put the missing kids in the fun times, which then became entered through combining with Baby. This idea would also align with the timing issue of Follow Me, as Afton may not have been able to put the remnant in the fun times due to his spring locking. The second possibility is that Afton brings the endoskeletons down one by one, like I said, but he doesn't melt the animatronics together, instead taking the molten metal from each individual endoskeleton and infusing them all into the fun times that way. Basically, he would bring Freddy down, infuse the remnant from just Freddy into the fun times, then go back, bring Bonnie down, and so on. This would explain how the remnant ends up in the fun times with Afton still not managing to get Golden Freddy. But the issue is just that he doesn't melt them together, and while the main 4 all end up in the fun times, the idea of melting them together in the 4th closet is useless because it doesn't add anything to the story, and same with the Candy Cadet story, so this option isn't very likely to me. The third option is one that I honestly don't like, but technically is possible, but luckily there is one other option. So we've established that Molten MCI is true, and that it happened from William melting the FNAF 1 endos together and infusing the molten metal into the fun times, but what if it didn't go down exactly like that? What if he never, ever melted the animatronics together and also never put them into the fun times? No matter what, the endoskeletons of the FNAF 1 animatronics are collected prior to sister location, but what if they never ended up in the fun times? Bear with me here, because I don't believe nor like this idea, I'm just presenting it as a possibility. We see the endoskeletons in the furnace in Ender's vent repair. I discussed in a video like 5 or 6 months ago how I think the minigames from FNAF VR are actually real events, because we know FNAFs 1, 2, and 3, and some of the other minigames like Funtime Foxy, Nightmare Fredbear, and Plush Trap did happen. So the other minigames also happening would make sense. They don't have to, but if the events make sense, I think they probably are real events. After the Fun Times leave Sister Location, the facility no longer had any reason to keep running. It could still be functional with people working there, but not looking after the Fun Times, instead likely looking after stuff like the mini arenas or the Biddy Babs, which likely leads to the events of Room for One More. Ennard, after dishing Circus Baby, could have possibly gone back to repair himself with the original Funtime Freddy head, and then gotten out again now that the Fun Times aren't really being observed anymore. But notice how the Funtime Freddy head in FNAF 6 looks rusty and burned, and also how he's called Molten Freddy. That indicates that he burned somehow before the events of FNAF 6. So it makes sense that Ennard burning in the furnace is why he became like that, repairing himself with the burned and broken pieces of Funtime Freddy's head. See where I'm going with this? He burns in the furnace that has the FNAF 1 endoskeletons in it before they're ever melted and before they're ever burned in that furnace, and that's when they end up melting and finally combining with Ennard, and that leads to Molten MCI still being true, just without Funtime's MCI. My only problem with all of these ideas is that they kind of just make Molten MCI more complicated than it should be. I think the most likely option is that maybe instead of these ideas, simply Afton never intended for Golden Freddy to be a part of the Fun Times, and simply went back to get the Spring Bonnie animatronic and steal the safe room like I originally thought. The Candy Cadet stories, instead of saying 5 things were melted together, could be implying the combinations of the endos, but just saying that 5 spirits were combined together. Instead of Golden Freddy being the 5th spirit, maybe the bite victim, in the case that he's not Golden Freddy, has pieces of him attached to each of the missing children, making him the 5th spirit in the Fun Times, but that's probably a theory for another day. Who knows? So, we've talked about Molten MCI for a while now, but it's not actually the only thing that tells us that Sister Location is after FNAF 1. There's another piece of evidence that I have talked about in videos, but never in videos on Sister Location being after FNAF 1. Why? Because it's information we just got recently. I think I've done a good job in the past at establishing the fact that I believe the Tales of the Pizzaplex stories take place in the game's timeline, which you can learn more about in a couple of my previous videos. But outside of the Mimic, there's one story that has caused a lot of discussion in the community: Didophobia. Didophobia is the final Tales story, and it's the one that many people claim to have solved FNAF 4. But if you ask me, while it did solve a lot about FNAF 4, it more so solved Sister Location to me. It explained the observation rooms and their connections to FNAF 4 more so, and of course, it basically told us when Sister Location takes place. FNAF 1 has been pretty well established by this point to be in 1993. The paycheck lines up with 1993, and although FNAF 2 doesn't really align with this, it would make sense that Night 5 would be on a Friday, which aligns with the date on the paycheck in 1993. The only other years that also match this date fall outside of the time frame that the pay would fall within. It's also worth noting the questionably canon FNAF AR Faz facts, which claim Freddy's pizza recipe was most popular between 1988 and 1993, which implies that to be the time frame that FNAF 1 location was open. Since in FNAF 1's newspapers it is said that Freddy's will close by year's end, that means we are playing in the year that the location closes, and since it's November in FNAF 1, the location is still open but will close very soon. Not to mention the Faz facts also mention that the most dangerous job in 1993 was a security guard, which makes sense since Phone Guy died that year. Admittedly, these Faz facts are questionable as they may have been scrapped due to them not being canon. I'm not really sure, but regardless, the date and the paycheck more so imply 1983. The only other option that works is 1992, which is possible as FNAF 2's 1987 calendar matches with 1992 and takes place at the exact same time of year as FNAF 1, but I personally lean more towards 1993, just because I think it makes a bit more sense, especially with stories like the Silver Eyes and Fine Player 2 having a theme of returning to Freddy's 10 years after a major event, which makes sense in Michael's case to return 10 years after the bite of 83. So I think it's 1993, but it could also maybe be in 1992. But it is absolutely no sooner or later, and so the point here doesn't change because Didophobia places the events of Sister Location after 1993 and obviously by extension 1992. How? Didophobia is all about the observation rooms on the Sister Location Breaker Room map, and it shows a kid named Rory trapped in the FNAF 4 Nightmare experiences for 10 years. The Sister Location facility had been abandoned 10 years prior and he'd been trapped here all this time. If we go back to Sister Location, cameras of the FNAF 4 bedroom can be found locked behind a 1983 keypad. That means Rory must have been placed in the observation rooms in 1983 or later, meaning that the main part of the story takes place in 1993 or later. What's important about this is the fact that Didophobia takes place before the events of Sister Location. During Sister Location, the Fun Times are destroyed and left in pieces in the scooping room, but they are still just on stage in Didophobia. What this means is that Afton must have started the rental service back up again after the events of Didophobia. You could say that Didophobia is in 1993 1993 but before FNAF 1, and that Mike ended up going to Sister Location later that year, but given everything else we've talked about in this video, it's much more likely that Sister Location simply takes place after FNAF 1, not right before it. And besides, that's the bare minimum. In reality, Rory was probably actually captured like a year or two after. Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental is implied to have started up shortly after Circus Baby's Pizza World shut down, after Elizabeth died, but Didophobia claims that the facility was abandoned 10 years ago, which would have had to be after Elizabeth died, with a gap to allow the rental service to start and then shut down. But using that to determine Didophobia's place in the timeline requires us to figure out when Elizabeth died, but let's leave that for next time. But that is everything I wanted to talk about for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to, and stay tuned for the video in the near future on when Elizabeth died, and I'll also be doing a video in the near future that basically goes over everything that you need to know about Into the Pit before the game comes out later this year, so stay tuned for that, but for now, I'll see you all in the next video. Bye guys!